Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Jenny Koch from the APA Sustainable Communities Division. First of all, I'm very, very sorry for the delay in getting started. We have done a run through and thought everything was up and working, but it looks like we're having some technical issues getting some of our speakers connected this afternoon. So thank you again for being on, and we're planning to go forward with the introduction to the awards for the portion, and then one of our awards speakers is available to speak at this point, and then in the meantime we will try to get everyone up and running, and if we can't, we will end up postponing the rest of the webinar, but we didn't want to keep you all waiting anymore. Thank you again for your patience. So as I said, my name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a Senior Associate and Planner with Roadside and Harwell. And today I'm representing the Sustainable Communities Division. We're hosting today's webinar. And our mission is to support planners who are committed to planning for sustainable communities by integrating all aspects of sustainability into our work through the combined economic, social, and ecological factors that shape our communities. As you well know, I'm sure today's webinar is called Award-Winning Sustainability 2018. And this webinar is eligible for CM credits for live viewing only. Before we go on, I want to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors. Thank you so much to all of you who help us put on events such as this webinar. Our sponsors this year include Clarion, Criterion, Dewberry, MC, Farr Associates, HAF, Montgomery Associates, Niche Engineering, Planning Communities, Robinson & Cole, Smith Group, TESCA, the Urban Collective, the University of Florida Online Masters of Urban and Regional Planning, and Urban Works. So thanks again to our sponsors and to all of our division members whose contributions also support our work. If you're interested in doing more with the division or volunteering with us or sharing your ideas for activities or webinars, please feel free to contact us. Right now we're in the middle of planning for next year's APA National Conference in San Francisco, and we'd love to have more people help us think about how we can make that a great event. So please feel free to reach out if you're interested. But on to today's event. We have 4 speakers here to speak about, we have 5 speakers to speak about 4 of the award-winning projects from last year's Awards for Excellence in Sustainability. I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then I will give an overview to this year's 2019 Awards for Excellence in Sustainability, which are now open for nominations. We're very excited about that. But our speakers today, first of all, and I will go through them and show a little slide showing their award-winning project they'll be speaking on. Our first speaker will be Michael Burnham, who's a senior planner with Thurston Regional Planning Council, based in Olympia, Washington. With the Planning Council, he works on environmental and transportation issues. Michael was previously a journalist in the Pacific Northwest and Washington, D.C., where he wrote about climate change, business, and other issues, and has been published by the New York Times, Seattle Times, Green Wire, Scientific American, and other news organizations. Dr. Chris Lebon from LA Metro is the Executive Officer of the Environmental Compliance and Sustainability Division. He will be speaking about 2 award-winning projects, including Metro Expo Line Phase 2 and the Environmental Compliance and Sustainability Department. Chris oversees LA Metro's internationally recognized environmental sustainability and energy initiatives. A published author and international speaker, he is also very involved with the transportation and environmental industries and research activities, particularly as chair of several American Public Transportation Association subcommittees. We will have 3 speakers with us today to speak about the City of Merredin's project, Merredin 2020, a comprehensive plan for downtown Merredin. Julia Brodelsky is the Director of Economic Development for the City of Merredin, Connecticut. Ms. Brodelsky is an economic development, public policy, and planning professional who has worked for over 20 years in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors. As Director of Economic Development for the City of Meriden, Ms. Brodelsky is the city's point person for economic development. Primary responsibilities include fostering economic development in Meriden in order to sustain and grow the tax base and assisting the city in implementing critical infrastructure improvements that are necessary to support and sustain economic growth. Bob Seal, AICP, Director of Development and Enforcement from the City of Meriden, will also be joining us. He oversees 3 divisions, including building, housing, and planning. And Bob's team provides support to the city's Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, Wetlands Commission, and the Design Review Board. And finally, our final speaker today is Woo Kim, AICP, who is a principal with WRT. Woo serves as project manager for WRT's housing and neighborhood plans, as well as downtown redevelopment and revitalization plans. Trained as an architect and planner, Woo's skill as an urban designer and planner is rooted in his ability to move from the architectural scale of housing and mixed-use development to large-scale city planning. He brings an interdisciplinary perspective to all of his work, with an emphasis on understanding the economic, environmental, and social issues of placemaking in the plans that he creates. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker. I am our first speaker. 1 second, please. So as I said, before we go into hearing more about those award-winning projects from last year, we wanted to give you an overview of this year's process, which, as I noted, kicked off earlier this month and will be open for nominations through January 11th, 2019. You can see a couple of links here for where you can download the information packet, either on our blog site, which is sustainableplanning.net, or at our official planning.org/divisions/sustainable/awards site. This year there are 8 categories. We've adjusted these a little bit and have removed a couple based on sort of level of interest, but we are excited about these categories, and we think that they provide a wide variety to they provide us with the opportunity to recognize a wide variety of projects. So one of the most important things to get at is what is new for this year. If you've submitted for the awards in the past, you know that we have, in general, asked people to submit them using sort of a packet that they have put together with images and text and submit via Dropbox. And this year we are using a web form, which is more along the lines of how you would submit for the National APA Awards. It's not the exact same web form. We're using SurveyMonkey, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But we thought that would be a way to streamline the process and make requirements more clear and get everyone on the same page. One potential issue with this is that you do need to complete the survey form for your nomination submission all at once. And so to help you with that, we have created a Word template for you to use to fill in with your information that you'll be uploading, so that when you are ready and you have all of your information together, you'll be able to just go to the survey form and submit it all at once. Another change this year is sort of by request from previous years. We found that people wanted to be able to include letters of support for their projects or programs, and so we had included a requirement for 1 letter of support with an additional letter of support optional for everyone to submit to allow their partners or other stakeholders to speak in support of their project. We will be keeping track of sort of any FAQs on the blog site, sustainableplanning.net, and if there are any updates to the program or process, we will be posting them there. So if you would like to be notified directly of any of these updates or any potential changes to the process, which we don't foresee happening, but you never know, please send me an email. It's jenniferk@roadside-harwell.com with the subject line SCD Award Updates, and I will make sure you're notified if that happens. My email will be up on the contact slide at the end as well. So with that, I am done talking at you about that, but I'm happy to answer questions. And I will say throughout the presentation, for all of our speakers, we will be holding off our questions until the end, but please do feel free to send them at any point using the Q&A function built into any meeting or using the attendee chat button as well. And before I pass it off, I just want to apologize one more time for making you all wait. And I will note, as I said, a couple of our speakers are having some trouble connecting in, but I'm going to be working with them while Michael is speaking to you, and we're hoping we can have everyone up and running. So thanks again. Michael?
Well, good morning. Thanks, Jenny. So good morning from the Pacific Northwest, folks. In the next few slides, I'm going to discuss how my colleagues and I developed the Thirst and Climate Adaptation Plan, which was adopted back in January and is now being implemented. I'll start off by covering the purpose of our project and then discuss some of the ways we integrated climate science and GIS mapping into policy development, as well as a board game, pop-up library, and public art into community engagement. So for folks unfamiliar with TRPC, we're a regional planning organization based in Olympia, about an hour south of Seattle on the southern shore of Puget Sound. We're Washington's capital city. Our policy council is composed of municipalities, tribes, colleges, and other stakeholders across the South Puget Sound region. The genesis of our climate adaptation plan is a 2013 project called Sustainable Thurston, which set a vision, goals, and targets to enhance the region's social, economic, and environmental sustainability. But one of the first action steps of that planning effort was to work regionally on climate change. So in 2015, we received a National Estuary Program grant from the US EPA to create a plan with actions to help our region prepare for and adjust to climate change impacts. This is, of course, what we mean by adaptation, preparing for and coping with impacts, as opposed to mitigation, which is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to global climate change. So as you can see on the map here, the adaptations plan's project area encompassed 3 watersheds that drain into South Puget Sound. The plan's recommended actions, however, may be taken by folks throughout the broader Puget Sound region and other parts of the Pacific Northwest, places that face similar climate impacts and have similar geographies. So we began the project by producing a science summary that looked at observed and projected climate impacts at the global, national, Pacific Northwest scales. And the document really incorporated recent climate research and analysis from a variety of sources, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. But one of the key takeaways from the science summary is that scientists conclude adaptation is now necessary. We're seeing climate impacts today and will continue to due to past emissions. So in the plan, we underscore that it's really socially and fiscally responsible for our region to begin adapting to climate change now. For example, protecting buildings at risk of sea level rise and wildfires, which we're facing today, and enhancing neighborhood emergency preparedness. These are the types of things that could save lives and dollars later and make us more resilient in coming years, no matter the risks. So building on the science summary, we produced a vulnerability assessment. And this was a 100-page document and incorporated data and analysis, principally from the University of Washington's Climate Impacts Group. We created a series of maps, such as what you see up here on the slide, to show historical and projected changes in climate indicators such as runoff, air temperature, precipitation, snowpack, sea level, things like that. A key takeaway from the vulnerability assessment is the South Puget Sound region may be pretty small geographically, but it's a very dynamic system. Here in Olympia, our built-in natural systems are affected by what happens up on the flanks of Mount Rainier and the surrounding highlands, as well as what happens down in the waters of Puget Sound and our fast urbanizing lowlands. So affected built-in natural assets we talk about in the plan include roads and bridges, estuaries and fisheries, farm crops, lake streams, and of course, human health and welfare. So a little bit more on the maps. We designed most of our maps to show climate impacts at a watershed scale based on downscaled modeling of low and high emission scenarios. These were used in IPCC's 5th assessment report from 2013. So by dividing our watersheds into smaller hydrologic units using GIS, we were able to show how changes in some climate indicators vary by elevation. For example, runoff and stream temperature and snowpack. What you see up here is April 1st snow depth. That's essentially snowpack in our region. You can see all of our maps and read the full annotated vulnerability assessment online at trpc.org. adaptation.org/climate. So I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but in a nutshell, what we learned from our research in spatial modeling is our average annual air temperature is projected to continue rising through the century. Generally, our winters will be wetter and warmer, so less snow, more heavy rain events. And our summers hotter and drier, so more droughts and whatnot. So such seasonal changes are expected to exacerbate hazards we already face. So floods, erosion, and landslides during the rainier months, and wildfires, droughts, and algal blooms during the drier months. But we can also anticipate new threats we learned, such as invasive plants and insects that affect our forests, and infectious diseases that thrive in a warmer climate. So working with our stakeholder advisory committee, it had about 25 people. We used an EPA methodology to analyze the impact of more than 80 climate risks identified in our vulnerability assessment. So we put each of those risks in the matrix you see here and considered likelihood. That is, when and where we'll likely see impacts given our climate modeling and research. And consequence, the severity of those impacts given our built-in natural assets risk exposure. So for example, if we're seeing a risk impacts now, such as sea level rise in downtown Olympia, it's of high likelihood, of course. And if a risk severely threatens our ability to achieve a community goal, such as protecting water quality and quantity, it's of high consequence. So based on this work, we selected strategies for risks of the highest consequence and likelihood, those in the red part of the matrix. We chose to take action by selecting a strategy for the plan. And for risks of lesser consequence and likelihood, those farther off and less acute today, we opted to accept the risk today and monitor for impacts going forward. So we use a multimedia public engagement strategy to educate the community about climate risks, elicit adaptation ideas, and get feedback on our draft actions and plan. And it sort of evolved through the process. We initially sat down with our local newspaper's editorial board, hosted community forums, developed online surveys and a video, and posted on social media. But we also followed that up by meeting with more than 20 groups, everyone from our local Sierra Club and Audubon Society chapters to fire chiefs, schools, business associations, and planning councils. We also developed the Resilience Road board game, which you see pictured here on the slide. This is available on our website to print, and to play, you and 4 of your closest friends can draw cards and take real actions from the plan. Players must then use those actions to respond to stressor setbacks along the road, including drought and sea level rise. It's a fun way, something for all ages. I've played it with my kids. I've also played it with climate scientists. It's a fun way to learn about real climate change risks and adaptation actions, very interactive. So we took the plan and the game on the road in a variety of ways. Firstly, we hosted something we called Art of Change. It was an event during the annual arts festival. You see that mural up in the top right of the slide. This included a pop-up library with climate books, videos, and other resources from our local library. It included this mural that shows plankton affected by ocean acidification and had the draft of the plan. So this is a very interactive thing. Folks who showed up could thumb through the plan, play the game, ask questions about the project. We also presented the board game in a poster at an annual Northwest Climate Conference up in Seattle. And then finally, we presented the project and facilitated an interactive version of the game, something you could play with 100 or so inmates at a local prison. This is part of a Sustainability in Prisons project symposium hosted by a local college. So this was a way really to reach very diverse audiences. Inmates, some of whom will end their sentence in a couple of years, will get out. And because of their record, they might be socially isolated or low income. And we know from our research, they might be the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. So this is a way to reach folks that we don't normally hear from. So in terms of the adopted plan, as you can see on the slide here, we have about 91 adaptation actions across 6 themes. So general, drought and water quality, flood and erosion, plants and animals, transportation and energy, and wildfire and extreme heat. All of these climate impacts and actions are very interconnected. So one of the challenges was finding the right categories for these actions, and we hope we did. So a couple of examples of the plan actions. So amongst those 91, we selected 25 priority actions based on a qualitative exercise that looked at, are the actions equitable? Are they long-term solutions? Things of that nature. And for each of these actions, we identified a lead, partners, and a time frame for implementation. So just a few examples from the plan. Action D3 is increasing reuse of reclaimed water for irrigating plants, supplementing low stream flow, which is very important for our salmon here, and other purposes. Action F3 was designing new and replacement stream culverts and other drainage infrastructure to accommodate projected higher peak flows associated with more frequent heavy precipitation events. And finally, action W2, requiring new developments in high-risk wildfire areas, the WUIs, the wildland urban interface, if you will, to submit a fire protection plan during site plan review. In terms of plan design, we tried to make this very technical information engaging and accessible to a general audience. The text is pretty spare. It's complemented by simple infographics, such as what you see up here on the slide, and full-page photos. All the technical information, the vulnerability assessment, the science summary, those are in the appendices. And in terms of plan resources, we have a pretty big online presence. Folks can watch a video about the project or explore our resilience toolkit. Now, this toolkit includes links to dozens of resources, including our local library's collection of climate books and other materials, household and neighborhood preparedness tips. So if there's an earthquake even, or a flood or a fire, these are things you can do as a household to be prepared and respond. And finally, planning and data resources, such as our interactive hazards vulnerability map. Now, the maps you see here shows community assets, and you can click through different layers to see how they're vulnerable to a variety of risks, such as landslides, wildfires, and whatnot. And the link to the toolkit is trpc.org/resilience toolkit. So in terms of implementation, there's a lot going on. With our regional plan, the City of Olympia and Port of Olympia have begun integrating actions from our regional plan into a sea level rise response strategy for downtown Olympia. So that has a lot of engineered strategies to cope with sea level rise. The photo you see here on the slide is from 2 years ago. Our downtown waterfront floods often when there's a king tide and heavy rain events. Also in Thurston County, our largest county, and the Squaxin Island tribe are integrating actions into their comprehensive plans. And TRPC and its partners are now beginning work on a companion climate mitigation plan. And the work was really catalyzed by the adaptation plan, and we've all adopted a common emissions reduction target of 85% below 2015 levels by 2050. So more work ahead. With that, I'm going to stop my slides here. I'd be happy to answer any questions about lessons learned and whatnot during the Q&A. My contact information is on the slide here.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Good news for everyone is that I believe we have all the speakers online here. So fingers crossed this works out, but I will invite Chris to connect and show your screen here. Let's see if we can get this working. And so do we have you on here, Chris?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to
great. Okay.
see, like, you're going to prompt me to connect?
No, I think you will have to go up and tell it to share your screen. You see the option for that?
Unfortunately, I don't. Oh, here. Sure.
Okay, that's... You got it? Okay. Sorry, everyone,
okay.
for this issue.
Sorry. Maybe, Jen, we can go to the next speaker first.
Sure, let's do that. Here, 1 second. I will pull this up. So then I will invite our team from Meriden. I believe we have them on. Wu, I'm pulling up your slides right now.
Yep. Jenny, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. And Juliet, Robert, can you speak up and check the audio?
We're here, yeah. Can you hear me?
Great.
Okay.
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Sounds good, right? Okay. And I'll advance the slides. Robert, Juliet, go ahead.
All right.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Meriden is a post-industrial city with many challenges and opportunities provided to it. We have had many flooding events in our downtown over the past 100 years. Most recently in 92 and 96, there was approximately $26 million worth of damage done in two major 100-year storms. In addition to the flooding issues, we have high poverty and unemployment rates in the central city that we were trying to figure out how to deal with those over many decades of planning. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, a flood commission board was put together to determine what direction the city was going to go in order to help remediate these flood issues that we had. In addition to trying to rebuild our downtown. The city has the opportunities of being directly in the center of Connecticut, as well as a rail line that runs right through the downtown core. With the planning that was going on at the state level, there was an understanding that a commuter rail line was also going to be going in, and the city wanted to begin planning for that. So we took it upon ourselves to begin the major planning process of creating a TOD, Transit-Oriented Development Zone, in the downtown, as well as make plans for the flood remediation issues. Wu, can you advance the slide one?
Sure.
So as you can see in the center of this photo is essentially what was a defunct mall that later became an industry building that sat right atop the Harbor Brook. Harbor Brook had been encased in a culvert back in the 1960s when redevelopment began downtown for the first time. And through this process of trying to determine how to deal with the flooding, we had determined that the best way to obviously deal with it was to open up the brook and create what would eventually become a central green area. Wu, if you can advance the slide.
Sure.
So we also felt the opportunity not only to create a central green, but also to tap into the opportunities that we had of, old structures, but had good bones, being right adjacent to a historic district. And the city began the process of securing funding and moving forward with RFP process to reach out to area developers and look at ways to remediate these flooding issues, in addition to the many brownfields that we have. Pretty much the entire central downtown of Meriden is a brownfield. So we were able to tap into funding to do the brownfield remediation as well as the flooding through multiple funding sources. But Juliet will be able to talk more about that in a moment. And actually, if you want to go ahead and take it from there.
Okay, sure. So, good afternoon. I'm Juliet Berdelsky. I'm the Director of Economic Development. Bob is the Director of Planning. So we've worked very closely together over the past few years, and my time on this project actually extends back to 2007. So my role in this project was really to take the planning, all the great planning that we did, and actually translate it into an implementation strategy that we're now kind of right at towards the middle or the end of. So it's been a really exciting time in Meriden's history. Meriden was a silver city at one time. All your grandparents' silverware was probably made at one time in Meriden. Nobody uses true silverware anymore, so we have all these industrial facilities that were abandoned brownfield sites. So even though we had these fantastic plans where we wanted to get rid of the flooding going in the central city that decimated a lot of businesses and properties, we needed to find some creative ways to fund this because Meriden is a distressed community. We just didn't have the resources. So the plan was really to take the opportunity of cleaning up one of the largest brownfield sites in the community, turn it into a town green that the town never had, and then set up economic development sites around the town green that would link to the new commuter rail that was coming right through the downtown. So it was a pretty big undertaking. And I like to say we pretty much used every planning tool that we've had at our disposal. We rezoned the city center to transit-oriented development district, taking away a lot of the parking requirements, allowing for mixed use. This was something brand new for Meriden. We had a Harbor Brook flood control plan that was permitted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the State Department of Environmental Protection. That took 20 years to get planned and permitted. We had our master plan, our plan of conservation and development. We had a TOD plan. All these pieces said, yes, people are going to want to come back to the city center. People are going to want to live in the city center. Now we just have to build it. To make the plan happen, we acquired properties. We acquired about 36 acres of property using every tool at our disposal. We had some condemnation. We had property swaps. We got a HUD grant to do some property acquisition. Site control was a really important component of this, so that once we were committed to doing the infrastructure improvements and the development, that we actually had site control. We used tax lien foreclosures, condemnation, tax lien sales, and then negotiated acquisitions. So we had about 36 acres that we could work with, including this 14-acre brownfield site that is now the focus of our topic today, which is the Meriden Green. Compounding the problem, though, is that these sites are contaminated. They were silver manufacturing. They were later converted into commercial retail. So we were dealing with sites that had, proximity to the rail, but, just loads of contamination. So first and foremost, this was a flood control town green development project, but it was also a brownfield cleanup project. So we were able to aggregate funds from local sources, and the state of Connecticut granted us about $13 million that we also were able to leverage about $600,000 from the US EPA. So it was just building these funding sources, these plans, these permits that now translated into this incredible green. So Lou, if you can put to the next slide.
Sure.
Also with this opportunity, Connecticut Department of Transportation has invested about $650 million in commuter rail service, and we were slated for a brand new train station. So we made it our number one priority that we were going to get one of these brand new rail stations next to our brand new park and flood control project. So that's a real highlight of this project, is that now we have solved the downtown flooding, we have proximity to rail, and now we have some cleaned parcels around downtown that now have development opportunity. Yeah, just next slide.
Sure.
Woo. What you see now is a transformation of that 14-acre brownfield site. We daylighted the brook that was in a concrete culvert underneath the site. It's a cleaned up site. There's a controlled cap underneath the green space. There's a decorative bridge. It's now a town green right in the heart of our central business district that is now just it's really a centerpiece of our downtown. People are now seeing again the potential in downtown. We have local groups that are so excited about bringing people downtown by creating festivals, summer music series, art fairs, music festivals. So it's really been kind of the catalyst for the rebirth of our downtown, getting people to feel safe and familiar again with a downtown that has been pretty much disconnected from the rest of the community of 60,000. But we're not done, and this is what Wu's going to talk about a little bit. Is it doesn't really do a lot for our economic development and the long-term future sustainability of our downtown just to have a remediated site and a town green in the middle of downtown, even though that's a wonderful thing. What really the goal is to use this whole project as a catalyst for new investment. Investment in the downtown, investment in new housing, investment in the community and quality of life. And this project has really spurred now kind of the whole new mixed-use housing strategy that Wu is going to talk about next.
Thanks, Juliet. Hi, my name is Woo Kim. I'm principal at WRT. We're a planning and design firm. Um, so at the heels of all this planning and teeing up of investments, the city, the housing authority, uh, joined forces in Meriden and partnered with a private developer to put together a choice neighborhoods planning grant application, which they were successful in receiving. And what this grant allowed the city and the housing authority to do is to reposition the Mills Memorial Public Housing site, which we have not yet brought up, but it's a public housing site that sits sort of at the northern and northeast tip of the Meriden Green. It's a 140 unit distressed public housing site, a number of towers, a number of low rises, and it was a real sort of detriment to the downtown. The choice plan was developed to take a look at this public housing site, to reimagine it as a mixed income community, but also to leverage everything that the city was doing in downtown, the investments in infrastructure, the investments in open space, circulation, brownfield remediation, to turn all that and turn it into a viable sort of downtown community, a mixed income community. What you're seeing here is sort of an illustrative map of the choice plan, where the different housing sites are slated to go. Ultimately, we ended up with a choice housing plan of about 600 dwelling units, with a one-for-one replacement of every public housing unit that was taken down from Mills Memorial. It came out to about half the total program to be affordable, another quarter to be workforce housing, and then a quarter of unrestricted housing. To date, about half of that program is either online, under construction, or soon to break ground. And another half, another 300 units or more so, to come online in the next few years. To back up a little bit, I want to talk just a little bit about choice neighborhoods and the program for those on the line who are sort of unfamiliar with it. It is a successor program to HUD's very well-known program called Hope 6, which was designed to address distressed public housing sites around the country. Choice Neighborhoods takes that 2 steps further by taking a look not just at housing, but also the neighborhood components, most of which Bob and Juliet mentioned earlier, and also the people side. And that's what's really important in a choice plan, is to make sure that there is a social program, a human capital plan alongside the housing and neighborhood plans, to make sure that the residents come back, some of whom are some of the most vulnerable residents in the city, have a safety net of services that will help them sort of be on a level playing field. I'll advance the slide a little bit further. A big part of the choice planning effort, and even the previous planning efforts that the city has taken on, was engagement. We had countless meetings, but we also made the meetings fun. I think the previous presentation had board games. I don't think we had anything that fun, but we had bus trips. We had a bus trip that we took to Boston to look at redeveloped sites, to redevelop public housing sites, and then to see what they can look like in the future. And residents, some of whom were skeptical that public housing could exist alongside market rate housing, alongside workforce housing, we took them to beautiful neighborhoods in Boston that were once very, very distressed neighborhoods with high crime and high poverty rates, and were able to see the transformation firsthand, the transformed communities firsthand. Meriden is a changing community. About 60% of the downtown population is Hispanic, and I would say most of that Hispanic population Puerto Rican. So we, in all of our engagement, we had it in English and Spanish. We had translators. Some meetings were actually in 2 languages. We had all our literature. In fact, the entire plan was also in 2 languages. And alongside the Hispanic population, there was also a very young population in downtown. And so we were able to engage the youth downtown to help us during planning activities to facilitate meetings. Many of the meetings were very family friendly, as you can see in some of the photos here. The public housing site, as of a few months ago, has started demolition. And what you see here is probably the last remaining stair core of one of the towers being demolished. And I think in a few weeks, the site will be entirely cleared. What all of these investments and incremental investments in planning and thoughtful leadership, federal programs, state programs, city investments have done is to really systematically take a look at the downtown and think of it in transformation in many different facets. You know, housing transformation, people transformation, resilient transformation in terms of the flooding, and commercial transformation as well. This is not a doctored photo, so this is the second mixed income housing development to come online downtown. This was designed by WRT. It's developed by Penrose Properties. You see just off to the picture on the left is a train station, so that's how close the transit station is. You're looking at the Meriden Green in the foreground and the mixed income housing in the background there. At the time this photo was taken, the public housing site was still standing, so you see some of that there. It is no longer standing today, so that's all taken down. This is the second phase. The first phase came online on Colony Street, on 24 Colony, and that had a similar program. That also had a parking structure associated with it to accommodate the parking requirements of the train station. This building is a green building. It's Energy Star certified. The entire public housing site was designed to LEED ND requirements, although it is not certified LEED ND. The second phase of this building, which is obscured by the building itself, it's actually behind the building. That building will be one of the first passive house, affordable housing or mixed income housing projects to come online. And passive house is a level of green building that takes a look at the insulation of buildings to make sure that there is a very little thermal changes in the building. And I think this is something that we're all very proud of, and the transformation is snowballing and happening at a really fast rate. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I'll just conclude just with a few, metrics since we're talking about sustainability. So the Harbor Flood Control Plan is helping the city remove 130 acres from the 100-year floodplain through engineered measures. So that's doing a lot for our community to reduce economic risk of flooding, particularly in the times of global warming and increased water flows. We've eliminated 140 units of distressed, very low income, very distressed public housing, replaced it now with 295 units of public housing and counting. We've managed in an economically distressed community that hadn't seen development in over 40 years. We've now seen private investment of over $110 million and generating another $150,000 in new taxes in the distressed downtown. So I think by so many measures, it's been a real success and a real model, I think, for other communities to follow. So thank you very much.
Jenny, I received a question. Do you want us to answer this one question now, or should we wait until the end?
I think we will hold off on questions until the end.
Okay.
But thank you all. That was great. These are so exciting to see the results of all these projects. We do have one more speaker. Let me get the presentation up here. All right. Chris, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, I do. And then I just move it forward on my end, right?
Yep, that'd be great.
All right. Thank you so much again to the APA Stable Communities Division, as well as to the folks who evaluated our nomination and have given us these two awards. It's not only a testament, I think, to the great work that's been happening here at the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, but also the great testament to the changes, the positive changes that the work that this organization, this agency, and its affiliates, are doing to the community. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to touch on the two awards that we received, and it will be an integrated presentation both on the leadership of this department that I'm heading here in the agency, as well as using those initiatives for the other award, which is for the Expo line Phase 2, and work through some of the other examples and attributes of our program here in the organization. So let me just do that beginning now. So the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority has been challenged by board of directors at least about 10 years ago to look at a sustainable vision for a transportation system. And this is born out of ballot measures that our board of members were thinking about, as well as some of the things that are happening across the state of California. There were a number of statutes that were passed in terms of climate change, in terms of sustainability, and coming out of the 9/11 tragedy that we experienced as a nation, the conversations about resiliency have emerged as well. But back then, the conversations on resiliency were not necessarily rooted towards climate change, but more on safety. And now, we're in revisiting some of our policies. We're essentially updating and upgrading a number of our plans that you will see here today that would include some of these other elements that were focused on safety before, but now with an integrated plan will also include climate change. Our projects go through the most vulnerable areas. I will show you in a little bit here on how that looks like. Technology is rapidly evolving with the transit agency, but at the same time, we're working through many of the issues that face many communities today, including homelessness, the lack of affordable housing, and whatnot. And so in that context, we also look at optimizing the environmental benefits of the projects that we do. And as with any other agency and entity out there, resources are scarce, so we need to be wise in the use of those resources. For those who are not familiar with LA County Metro, well, again, we're a transportation agency. We're not a county agency. It just so happens that the word county appears in our name. We're a state chartered special jurisdiction. We're born out of a state legislation that operates within LA County. We're the regional transportation planner, funder, the builder of transportation systems, as well as the operator of these systems. Now, drilling down a little bit on the Environmental Compliance and Sustainability Department, back in 2003, when I started out here in the agency, what I saw back then is a very small department that actually, to the left of the slide there, just supported a very limited amount of environmental work, but mostly in construction and a little bit in the planning as well as in the environmental compliance space. But now, this department has grown significantly. We are a full service and with a comprehensive network of services. We're internal and external facing, and you'll see this in a little bit what that means. We're considered as the in-house expert for the environmental sustainability and resiliency programs. And then about 3 years ago, we actually changed our name from Environmental Compliance and Services Department to Environmental Compliance and Sustainability Department to more reflect, what we actually do here in the organization. Just a little bit of what we are working through and working on. All the boxes you see here, beginning with the second set of boxes, all the way down, are pretty much our function here in the organization. On the second set of boxes in there, that's our environmental compliance function. The third set of boxes there include our sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions function for the organization. And then the fourth set of boxes are pretty much the rest of the functions we have that not only support the various business units here, but provide support in a number of other non-traditional functions, if you may, including on the very last box there on the bottom, carbon credits administration, wherein we sell carbon credits here in the agency to raise revenue and reinvest it back to some of the work that we're doing. And I'll give you more examples on what that means here in a few minutes. In terms of green infrastructure, we have been building in the past few years on many of our properties here in the agency. We have about 2,000 properties spread across LA County, and then in addition to that, we have a significant amount of rights-of-way that we actually are starting to also build from or build on. And in terms of, in particular, the green infrastructure space, we look at different methods, materials, and structures and innovate on those. We also have a project-specific sustainability plan that we are committed to developing for every single project, and I have a slide on what that plan might look like and how we interface with many of our community members as well as our constructors and designers. We have implemented many emerging ideas in terms of clean tech, in terms of new construction processes and procedures as retrofits to our existing buildings. In the transit industry, there is a process called, or a term called state of good repair. And what that really means, for those who are not familiar with that, what SGR means is for us to be able to function consistently throughout the life of any asset. And in order to do so, we need to be proactive in ensuring that their functionality over time. In terms of green strategies, we have some examples in our projects that I have here on the slide. And then we also look at operations and maintenance strategies. Not a very sexy topic in terms of any organization out there. We love shiny, bright new things. Many people love to see that. But over time, what we have learned, and we're not ashamed to share with folks, is our failure in the past to actually maintain the environmental benefits of those infrastructures. And given the lessons of the past, we're able to now work through many procedures that we implement that have become not only best practice here in our agency, but also best practice in the industry. LEED, for those who are familiar with that, is a policy here in our organization. Any infrastructure that's greater than 10,000 square foot or larger has to be at least LEED Silver certified. Envision, which I'm going to talk about in the context of our Expo Phase 2 project, is not a policy, but it's something that we're implementing as a framework, not only for construction projects, but also as a framework for us here within the basin as we work together in expanding the system. We use Envision as a framework to talk about how sustainability can be implemented across the board, not only in our projects, but in the different infrastructures as well as communities we touch. I want to give you a flavor of how our transit system actually is evolving right now. The solid lines that you see there on the screen include those that have been built. The dashed lines are the ones that are currently being built right now. Back in 2016, exactly 2 years ago, we have been given the privilege by the taxpayers of Los Angeles County to actually spend up to $120 billion under the Measure M program to transform, expand, and maintain the systems that we have and we will have in the next few more years. That was piggybacking on another ballot measure, Measure R, which provided us with at least $40 billion to actually jumpstart that process. And right now we have about 105 miles of rail, 96 stations, and by the time we're done, at least with the Measure R program, we will have about 205 stations and at least a doubling of the number of rail miles that we have. We move about 1.5 million people here in the Los Angeles County area. We have a mandate to finish 28 projects in time for the 2028 Olympics and the 2026 World Cup. So as you could see, and hopefully you could sense, and I'll go to the next slide here. You could sense we have a tall task to do here. If you remember my earlier slide, we're subject to some of the most stringent regulations, not only environmental but climate change statutes and regulations in the whole country, if not the world. And not only are we expanding the system throughout the more than 4,000 square miles of LA County that you see here in the screen in terms of our transit system, but also enhancements to the highway system. We need to make this system climate safe. And that's part of my job, that's part of the job of this department, to ensure that these systems not only can serve their purpose, but to ensure our taxpayers and the people we're serving that they will be here despite the evolving impacts of climate. To give you an idea of how much support we're actually doing right now, we're working on all of these projects. This slide says that we're supporting, my department supports about $14 billion worth of projects, but that has grown in the last few months. We're currently supporting up to $16.8 billion worth of projects. In about 2 years, we'll be supporting about $20 billion worth of projects. And it's, like what I said earlier, it's a very challenging task. And some of the examples here on the screen that you see are flavors of some of those. Similar to the communities that you've heard ahead of me, we have done a criticality as well as a vulnerability assessment throughout our system. This is very important for us. We have a significant amount of stressors that you see enumerated on the left-hand side of the screen here. And we did our criticality and vulnerability assessment in two ways. One, on the service, to ensure that, again, all the people we serve are actually delivered and are able to go to wherever they need to go as part of our system. And the other one is a criticality and vulnerability assessment in terms of our infrastructure. This next slide here makes it more real for a significant number of our constituents. I just want to highlight specifically the yellow areas as we overlay our system on those. And that yellow area pretty much, is a representation of where greater than 25% of our population actually live 125% below the poverty line. And I just want to emphasize that point in the yellow area, greater than 25% of our population live below 125% of the poverty line. And as you could see there, as we expand our system, we're actually bringing a significant amount of those people who otherwise would not be able to go to the economic centers of our county, of our region, if not for the transit system. I did mention earlier that we move at least 1.5 million people every single day here in the county. More than 60% of those are transit dependent, and this map hits home. In the last few years, we have worked through a significant number of plans, including a climate action and adaptation plan that we're currently updating to include not only the latest science, but at the same time the latest climate reducing strategies that we can find throughout the planet. We have also worked through, as I mentioned earlier, a vulnerability and risk assessment, and we had worked with specifically Occidental College here in Southern California in developing and now we're tracking up to 109 different adaptation metrics. We initially selected about 7 of those metrics in the last year and a half, and we're almost we have almost fulfilled our commitments to essentially fulfill our obligations through those metrics, and now selecting through the rest of the list of metrics that we have developed with Oxy. We also have developed what we call as a resiliency indicator framework, wherein underlying that framework is a tool that graphically represents either our organizational as well as our technical resiliency. We're currently upgrading and updating that framework that will lead up to a resiliency policy that will be presented to our board, hopefully for approval by spring of next year. Just a little bit on these plans in general. We collaborate with different organizations around the world in addressing not only many of the issues, but also bringing home here in Los Angeles the best practices that other communities around the world are looking at and implementing. And wherever we can do that, we are not only working that through internally here in our agency, but also externally with our stakeholders. I did mention earlier that it's a requirement for us to have a sustainability plan in every single project. Just gives you a flavor of where the sustainability plan and our interaction with our constructor lies. This is the monitoring phase, if you may, of the projects. As you can see here, I just want to highlight the bottom part of this slide, wherein we have 3 opportunities, and the third one is actually a continuing opportunity to interface not only with the constructor and the designer, but also, as things evolve, as things change throughout the process during the design and construction phase, we're able to work with our communities as well in ensuring, again, that these projects that we build here in LA not only withstand climate, but also are protective of the communities where they go. I won't go much into this. The point of this slide is that I did mention earlier that Envision is not a policy, but the point of this slide is that we have adopted Envision here in the organization to give us the framework for ensuring that the projects that we build conform to its principles. In the project I'm going to highlight here, which is the Expo Phase 2, the Envision framework that was used was more of for the planning phase of the project, and now Envision 3.0, for those who are familiar with it, really emphasizes this transition, from planning towards acting, and we have learned much from our project in Expo Phase 2, and I'll give you an example of where we're applying those lessons learned here after I highlight Expo Phase 2. So what have we done in terms of that project? There were many elements that I could highlight, but I'll highlight 6 of those here that might be of interest to you. The first one is at our Bergamot Street station. We have looked at that in terms of the operations and maintenance of the station, and allowing us to actually make use of the project elements in there to come up with how we would actually maintain uniformly across the board many of these stations that we're building. In terms of Expo and Bundy, we've put in porous pavement in there, our first porous pavement project in our system, and we're looking at that more in the context of freshwater availability. Groundwater replenishment is certainly a big thing here in Southern California, and this is our way of contributing to that issue in our region. Also wanted to highlight in terms of the Palm Station, there's a significant amount of stakeholder involvement at the Palm Station. At least 1% of every project budget is allocated for public art here at our agency. And through the Palm Station, not only are we able to have our selected artists for that line express themselves, but we're able to accommodate the community engagement and community input that would otherwise not be available if not for our active outreach to them. In terms of our Culver City station, for example, we have used that station under the Envision process to actually demonstrate not only energy efficiency strategies, but also to reduce light pollution, however we can, by redirecting many of the previous designs and reinventing many of the previous designs in our stations for this particular station. And then finally, last couple of examples in terms of Expo Phase 2, similar to the Meridian project that you heard, we have a significant amount of contamination on our right-of-way on Expo Phase 2 alignment. While we have remediated that, what we also have done specifically at the Expo Sepulveda station is the minimizing noise and vibration by using special track materials in there that lowers decibel levels for light rail as well as any vehicles that actually pass over them on the street. And then the final example here is it says preserving diversity at the Westwood Rancho Park, but I think it's more than preserving the diversity. We have similar to one of our the other station, the Palm Station that I mentioned earlier. We have a significant amount of community input in how this greenway was developed for the Westwood Rancho Park, and not only in the aesthetics of it, but also in the operations of it. And we're very proud of not only these 6 stations, but also the achievement of Envision Platinum for Expo Phase 2, one of the, if not the first, transit project to achieve that in the whole country. Just as a side note, going back to climate change issues, what you see here in the middle of the red circle there is our Expo Rancho Park station. The very short of the story is that we're able to actually adjust that particular station's height to accommodate climate change impacts, future climate change impacts, specifically to severe flooding. What we did there during construction was we were able to update through some of our strategies the calculations that the engineers have used, and by net present valuing some of the operation, maintenance, and retrofit dollars, and comparing that to actually building this to be climate safe, we had determined that it was worth the investment now to prevent any of the issues that we might foresee in the future. In the interest of time, I'll go through the rest of the slides relatively quickly. Just additional examples of what we have done here in my department and in our agency, and some of the lessons learned from Expo Phase 2. What you see here is really an application of what we have seen in Expo Phase 2. We're looking at iconic solar panels. Those are the triangular systems that you see there as canopies. We've developed a new way of harnessing the community and patrons standing on the bus stop by implementing piezoelectric technology on this bus stop. But more importantly, we have overlaid high heat days maps onto this particular area, and we're now rethinking of some of the frequency of the bus service in this area as we move along over the course of the few more years that this bus stop will be, once it's built, will be servicing the community. The point of this slide is that we're also looking at reducing our not only our greenhouse gas emissions, but also our criteria air pollutant emissions during construction, and this is through the implementation of our policies, in particular a green construction policy. And then this particular slide provides you with some additional strategies that we actually use in our projects. And this not only shows leadership within the region, but the U.S. EPA in particular has looked at our green construction policy as one of the, in their words, most effective ways, non-commercial ways of actually reducing air pollution during construction. Some examples of green buildings here in the organization. We plan to green all of our campuses by 2020. We have about 18 of those campuses. Right now, we have about 12 of them already green. We have a significant number of solar as well as other renewable installations throughout the county. I just provide you here with some examples of those. In particular, a particular example I would like to highlight is the Downtown LA Division 13. We're experimenting right now, and this is really the flavor of this group. We want to experiment and want to try out new things. And on Division 13 in particular, what you see there on the facade are vertical solar panels, high-efficiency solar panels that we're experimenting and trying to understand how we can apply some of those strategies across the system. And then on the upper right-hand corner there, Monrovia Maintenance and Operations Facility, the canopy is actually a solar panel, but it's solar panels that are 1 inch square each that were put together that allow sunlight to come through, but at the same time those panels are capturing the sunlight to produce energy for the facility. We're working very closely with our communities. As a transit agency, we have stations that are opportunities of engagement. Fresh food access is something that we have looked at before, that we can make a difference, specifically in South LA. Food deserts are are prevalent in that area of Los Angeles, and we're using our stations to actually not only allow folks to have access to other areas where fresh food can be bought, but as opportunities for those communities to experience real farmers markets. And I'll show you a slide here in a few seconds on where if you're here in LA and you're visiting us, where you can access some of those, the schedule for those farmers markets. The rest of this slide really points out to the innovation and the multiple opportunities that we create, again, not only for ourselves, but for the communities that we engage with. This is the Fresh Farmers Markets website that I was talking about in here. And then one of our success stories is the Compton Station Farmers Market we're in. If not for the Fresh Food Access Initiative, the farmers market at the Compton Station, which remained dormant for about 10 years, would not have been resuscitated. So we're very proud that the city of Compton in South LA had really looked at the opportunity with us to bring true farmers markets in their community. Shifting a little bit on in terms of clean air leadership here in the region. We run the largest bus fleet in the whole country, and second only to China, the largest bus fleet in the world. The point this slide is trying to make is that we're always constantly looking for alternative ways to reduce pollution that might be coming out of the tailpipes of the buses that we run. Right now, we are 43% biomethane propulsion power for our buses. For those who don't know what that is, methane, CNG in particular, comes from either fracking or renewable sources such as landfills, dairies, or wastewater treatment plants. Biomethane comes from those renewable sources, and right now we're running our buses on 43% of our fleet is running on biomethane. And around this time next year, we're programmed to run all of our bus fleet on 100% biomethane. And combine that with ultra low NOx engines, we can get as close to zero emissions as possible, without going actually zero emissions buses. And you can see there in the yellow box some of the achievements that we have done or we're achieving right now with the use of these alternative fuels. But that's not enough. We actually have a commitment by 2030 to go zero emissions buses. Some equate zero emissions buses to electric buses, but that's not necessarily equivalent. We are looking at several alternatives, fuel cells, electric, and some other alternatives of zero emissions fleet. And our commitment there is to make sure that not only are we cleaning up the air further here in Los Angeles, but also those buses actually are interchangeable to ensure continual service across the system. At the same time, our commitment to our stakeholders to actually bring them the most reliable system across the board. The point of this slide is that we're committed in our operations as well here in the agency. The sustainability program here in our organization is using an instrument called the Environmental Management System to ensure that best practices are captured across the board. We have a training institute. We're using analytics for continual improvement. And the leadership is not only from the top to bottom, but bottoms up. We make sure that all the voices are heard from the front line so that we can make sound policies moving forward. And then we look at funding that we put through as investments, not only in our people, not only our infrastructure, but also in our communities. I run the EV charger program here in our organization. The point of this slide is that we have looked at the EV charger program in a little bit different way. We have a transit system to run. We don't want the EVs to compete with our transit system, and so therefore, in that kind of vision, we initially have put in our electric vehicle chargers on the periphery of our system, as you could see here in this slide. And for those drivers who would like to drive in occasionally versus leaving them out on the periphery of our system, we have installed and continually install some of those EV chargers within the inner core of the system, as shown by the two EV symbols there in the middle of the slide. We plan to install up to 3,000 chargers in the next decade here in the region, and then we also are looking at different mobility alternatives for people to use, so that there hopefully will be no option for our patrons here, but to look at multi-mobility as a way to move around versus just driving a car to move around.
Hey, Chris. Sorry, this is Jenny.
Yeah.
Can I just hop in for 1 second? I just wanted to remind everyone, again, apologize that we started a bit late, so we're going to run a bit late. If you can't stay to finish out the presentation and maybe a few questions, just a reminder, the recording will be on our website. But feel free to keep going. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. So just to finish off, we have partnerships. We're working with the American Society of Engineers, American Public Planning Association, American Public Transportation Association, U.S. Green Building Council, on many initiatives, not only on the engineering side, but also in the training side. What we're trying to do here is that we would like to create a workforce here in the basin, up to 1,500 people who actually understand sustainability and resiliency. We've been training them over the course of the last year and a half. Our vision is to have at least 1,500 people trained and certified on Green Professional certification as well as Envision. In about a year and a half, we've trained about 800 people of the 1,500 that we're targeting. We've certified about 400 of those. We're reinventing our procurement process here through a green procurement initiative, and then through research and policy, we're actually working through some of the gaps, in our program. I won't go through this in detail, but give you a flavor of our commitment to environmental justice. Some of those details are here in the slide. I already talked about the greener fleet, as well as the progression of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as we achieve that. We have formed a sustainability council to be as inclusive as possible, not only with our partners, but with the NGOs across the system. 26 voting members of the Sustainability Council represent about 11 million people here in the region, and it's really providing us with input that we cannot have achieved and have heard of if not for the formation of this. And then I talked about this a little bit earlier, that we really look at the life cycle of the projects, and then innovation and creativity is really driving our culture here. One last thing that I wanted to point out, a lot of folks are asking, how do you fund all of these stuff? We have an annual $2 million allocation that we can use for new things that have never been tried anywhere else in the world. That program has been going on for the last 8 years, so about $16 to $20 million have been invested in trying out new things, new innovative things. that we continually use to improve our system, our processes, as well as our work here. We're privileged to be in a state where there are carbon credits that get generated. We sell carbon credits through my department here. We generate about 100,000 carbon credits a year at about $200 per credit. So that's about $20 million a year that we generate, and reinvest that back, into infrastructures that we build. And then about a year ago, we essentially began the process of going into a green bonds program. About a year ago, we sold about $500 million worth of green bonds that we are now using in many of our infrastructure and our projects. We're in the process right now of developing another issue of $250 million worth of green bonds that will hopefully be part of an overall program moving forward. And then finally, on this slide, we're looking at public-private partnerships. We're monetizing benefits here in the organization similar to carbon credits, so we can create investments out of these infrastructures we're building. And then we're also looking at other opportunities. And then key takeaways are on the screen here. Essentially, a lot of the things that we're doing, we're already doing. By cataloging them and making all of these stakeholders, not only here internally but externally, aware of all of this, we not only can plan but also build a very sustainable community and region here in Los Angeles. Vulnerable populations are the forefront of our thinking here. Data is at the heart of the things that we do, and then fiscal responsibility is key. And finally, looking at transit a little bit differently actually creates a lot of innovation and opportunities for investment for us. So here's my contact information. Again, thank you for the opportunity to tell you about our two stories here combined in a series of slides. And it's a privilege to connect with EPA, SCD, and hopefully, we can work together, not only through this forum, but, the things that we do here in the agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of our speakers. I do want to answer a few questions, but we probably won't get to all of them since we are running late due to our earlier difficulties. So if we don't get to your question, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email, this is Jennifer Koch. My email is on this slide under the awards contact, and I will make sure to connect you and get an answer to your question. But I want to start and answer, there were a few questions about the awards. I think I can answer pretty quickly. One is whether you can nominate joint teams for awards, and yes, you can nominate teams for an award. If you want some clarification on how to go ahead submitting that team, please feel free to shoot me an email. There was also a question about whether a project has to be complete or if it can be ongoing or near completion. If there is a development project that's being, constructed, I think that is a fine thing to submit under the development project category. If you're thinking about a plan, we do require that the plan is a published final plan, not a draft plan. And then the last question about the awards was whether we're able to share examples of past applications from those who have won awards. And we haven't done that in the past, and I think especially since we've changed the process quite a bit this year, I don't think we can provide that information for you, so I'm sorry about that. I also want to get to some of the questions about our speakers. And there was a question early on for Mike Burnham from Thurston Regional Planning Council, wondering if you could elaborate on the economic incentives of your plan.
Sure. I'll go through a couple of them. For example, in the energy sector, we had a couple actions in there for our utility to provide incentives to support energy efficiency, renewable investments in buildings. So the state allows what's known as on-bill financing, as I'm sure some of your other states do. Essentially, the electric utility here, Puget Sound Energy, would provide a loan to the owner of a commercial or residential building to invest in on-site renewable energy generation, for example, rooftop solar panels. The borrower would pay the loan back on its electric bill over time. So the benefits are twofold. The borrower saves money on its electric bill over time and reduces its need for the utility to buy or produce new energy. Other examples include utility rebates or bill credits to induce folks to install energy efficiency appliances or other equipment. Some of the other ones we looked at were actions to induce developers to build in urban infill housing, for example. So the theory is those urban units use less energy and they put less pressure on our grid, which is vulnerable to climate change impacts. So some of those credits include, or incentives include 10-year tax credits or impact fee waivers for parks and transportation in our region. We hired a consultant, Earth Economics. They're based out of Tacoma, Washington, to perform some benefit cost analyses of some of these actions, notably the Action G12. I think that was to increase incentives for urban infill and redevelopment. And basically what they did is they incorporated the value of ecosystem services, for example, the natural capital of providing wildlife habitat or filtering water. And we looked at that versus the forfeited revenue from urban infill, for example, if a city waives parks or impact fees, versus the value of ecosystem services preserved in rural areas. So we could look at if you're developing 100 units in the urban core versus 100 units of single family homes in a greenfield development. So really tried to look holistically at the costs and benefits from a social, economic, and environmental perspective. The link to the benefit cost analyses is on our website. You can also read a little bit about it in the plan.
Great, thanks, Mike. A couple of questions for Chris. One was whether you considered high-speed rail in any of your transit projects, such as high-speed rail to Las Vegas. And I believe the other question was for you, but others might be able to answer as well, and that's whether business improvement districts have helped in any of your sustainability projects.
Yeah, we're closely integrating our system to the high-speed rail authorities' efforts. We actually bought Union Station here in downtown LA to make sure that, the part of it is self-serving in context of we want to control how our system expands in light of high-speed rail authorities infrastructure coming here in Union Station. But at the same time, we're ensuring that there's a seamless integration, of all of those elements with them. In terms of the Las Vegas project, I think that's a different. That's a privately funded project, and at this time, I'm not sure where that is. In terms of the second question, in terms of the business improvement districts, we actually work very closely with many of those communities. So one example would be the Culver City Station, for example, wherein that not only has spurred economic development within the immediate area in there, but the city has designated, which is the flip side of I think the question, has designated that as a bid, to spur more growth and more development, using transit as the cornerstone of that development.
Great, thank you. All right, any last thoughts about business improvement districts and sustainability projects from any of the speakers?
This is Chris Lima. We are really serious in in our call to collaborate, with other entities across the country, and I'm hoping that what you heard from me and from us today will spur some ideas on how that can be. We're here to not only share our lessons learned, but at the same time learn from other people's experiences. I see our contact information there on the screen, and certainly would like to hear from folks whose interest might have been piqued, by the statements that were made today. So.
I think that's a good note to wrap up on. I'm sure that goes for any of the speakers as well. So please do feel free to reach out to them. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the awards or anything you saw. I've uploaded the presentation slides to the website already, and we will get the recording of this webinar up there as well. But thank you again to all of our speakers and to all of you for sticking around with us, and we hope to see you next time, and we hope to see some of your nominations come through for the 2019 awards. Thank you.
Thank you.